What comes to mind when we say Death Troopers? For a few, it may be the cybernetically enhanced black armored Stormtroopers that were first introduced to us in Rogue One. Indeed, they were an elite contingent of the Stormtrooper Corps, not easily dealt with on the battlefield. But for many more of you listening, it's more than likely that what came to mind was a passing shadow in the corridors of a darkened Star Destroyer floating dead in space. You hear it, the sound of a growl gurgling out of a rotted vocal cord. You smell it, diseased, decaying flesh dripping to the ground with every step. And now you can see it, a shambling corpse, white Imperial armor stained red with its own blood. The Death Troopers were the name given to the reanimated corpses of those who suffered in the dreadful accident known as the Blackwing virus outbreak. So, welcome back to the halls of the archives today, my friends. It is especially dark, and in today's holocron that we have selected, the horror continues with the full story of the Blackwing virus outbreak, the Sith bioweapon that had a real potential to turn the galaxy into an undead wasteland. Spoilers lie ahead in this holocron to some of the best Legends novels in Red Harvest and Death Troopers. So now, let us open it. The story of the Blackwing virus, or Imperial bioweapon I-71A, actually does not begin with the Empire, nor does it begin with Darth Sidious, but rather long ago, in Vitiate's timeline, at some point prior to the year 4645 BBY. In the days of the reconstituted Sith Empire, there was a Dark Lord of the Sith that went by the name of Darth Dreer. Like many Dark Lords, Dreer was obsessed with immortality, but was not having any successes in finding the secrets through the conventional methods of study. While essence transfer existed, Dreer was not privy to that information, as it belonged to the Sith Emperor, and the Sith Emperor alone. But Dreer was not only a scientist, but he was a clever alchemist as well. And so, he constructed a Sith Academy on the snow-covered world, a world named Odair Academy, working his students until they literally dived in order to carve out the icy temple with the Force. Darth Dreer himself created a secret underground laboratory in order to carry out his experiments. On the very interior walls of his temple, he would carve out his plans for immortality, his plans for the destruction of the Jedi, his plan to transcend. Finally, he discovered a way of achieving this goal, though it was a vile method indeed. He discovered that it would require the corruption and use of a rare force-sensitive plant, a plant known as the Murakami orchid. This specific plant was not only sentient, but had an extremely high midichlorian count. But what made it so special would be that it would bond to beings with a similar midichlorian count to itself, and could not survive unless the bonded person was within its vicinity. The last of these orchids were being kept by the Jedi Order though, in its agricultural core, and only a select few young Jedi were bonded to the orchid. Darth Dreer, however, would kidnap one of these Jedi, alongside with their specific orchid, and his efforts in alchemy produced a sweet elixir. This is where the clock begins. The elixir carried with it a viral disease that would ultimately attack and shut down the host's brain, leaving the decaying body to exist as an empty shell of undead tissues. After consuming the elixir, the host would cut out and eat the heart of a strong force sensitive. The midichlorians found in the blood in the heart were enough to halt the decaying process momentarily, and would prevent the user from devolving into a mindless, undead creature. Dreer stored this knowledge of the formula in a Sith holocron before moving to complete his plans and to cheat death. For this occasion, Dreer would fashion a special ceremonial blade exclusively meant for the procedure of cutting out the heart of a Jedi. When the time came, Darth Dreer ingested the elixir, but his plans for eternal life would be foiled. He would realize that the Jedi that he had captured and possessed had an insufficient midichlorian count, and the Sith Lord would soon die. Darth Dreer would eventually succumb to the ritual of his own creation, perishing and becoming the very first victim of what would become known as the Blackwing virus. But this would not be the end of the ritual. It would again be attempted 1,000 years later in 3645 BBY. During the 10-year ceasefire following the Great Galactic War, a Sith Lord by the name of Darth Scabarus became the headmaster of the academy that had once belonged to Darth Dreer. During his tenure there, Scabarus journeyed deep into the library's ancient labyrinths and discovered Dreer's hidden temple. Within, the Sith Lord obtained his predecessor's holocron and his lethal secrets that lay within. The lust for immortality consumed the mind of yet another Sith Lord, as Scabarus decided that it would be his goal to achieve what Dreer did not. To this end, he set about recreating the same ritual. For a while, he lacked the key component of the orchid and made several unsuccessful attempts to synthesize this property. He would frequently abduct the very same students he oversaw in the academy and have them brought to his lab in the tallest room of the central tower. There, he conducted torturous experiments on them to make the ritual work. In one unlucky case, the acolyte selected went by the name of Whim Nictor. The young Sith hopeful had recently lost a sparring duel, and Scabrous promptly kidnapped the boy and placed him in a cage. There, he inserted 6 large tubes into his vertebrae. The boy was weak anyway, and the true Dark Lord intended to use him as the organic host in which the viral elixir could be synthesized. The young student, though, quickly lost his mind, as he was given all the fluid pumped into his body immediately. Meanwhile, bounty hunters that Scabrous had dispatched across the galaxy in order to locate the elusive orchid returned with both the plant and the Jedi that it was bonded to, a Jedi by the name of Trace. With both of the things he needed to complete the ritual, Scabrous promptly added the plant to the viral mixture being pumped through the acolyte's body. With this addition, the disease fully activated within him, and insanity drove the boy to finish his own life. He was then reanimated as an undead zombie. But this was not a weak or a rotted away corpse. The acolyte was a monster of death with inhuman strength. The reanimated corpse snapped free of its cage, tearing the surgical tubes from its back, and attacked Scabrous. The Sith Lord, having caught up in his triumph, failed to predict such an event would happen and had chunks of his own face bitten off by the zombie. During the commotion, the young Jedi Trace bolted out of the laboratory in order to make her grand escape. Another Sith student, however, that had snuck into the tower to investigate the activities, noticed the amount of students going missing and was concerned. However, the other acolyte ended up getting caught in the fight between Scabrous and his new creation, and he would be flung out of the laboratory when he was force pushed by Darth Scabrous, sending the boy flying out of one of the laboratory's viewports. The 2 students would land 100 meters below and were crushed by the impact. Full well knowing he was now infected, Scabrous treated his wound in an effort to stave off the disease. He would also fit himself with a portable hemodialysis pump and monitored his contamination level. The pump transfusions would only grant him 6 hours of life though, until he too became one of the undead. And so, the Dark Lord with his precious few hours went on hunting down the Jedi Trace, hoping to complete the ritual before it was too late and bring the dream of Dreer to life. Meanwhile, at the bottom of the tower, Nictor's body got off of the ground and began to eat what remained of the student who had fallen along with him. Another Sith acolyte witnessed this take place, trapping the corpse under a pile of stones while the other students witnessed, as she quickly told them to run away. However, the dead body of the student that had fallen with Nictor had gotten up and shambled its way into the dormitories, attacking and infecting 7 more of the Sith students. The Academy Masters all sensed the sickness as a disturbance in the Force, gathering all of the students together to inform them that lessons were cancelled and that they were to return to their dormitories immediately. But those that could not would congregate in the dining hall for further instruction. 120 students who went into the dining hall were immediately ambushed by the undead, and all of them were murdered, becoming an army of the infected. From that point forward, the Academy was gradually being overrun with the sickness as it spread. The virus, though, oddly seemed to almost have a will of its own, being powered by the dark side. One of the Sith Masters who ended up getting infected was hearing this sickness as a voice within his mind, telling him that all things, flesh, books, and even the planet itself were nothing but meat, nothing but fuel for him. In a zombie survival situation, the most important aspect for survivors to have is that of teamwork and cohesion, which is absolutely terrible when the only survivors are all Sith Lords. As quickly, even those that were not infected began to turn on one another, as the Sith Masters drew their lightsabers, cleaving through one another for whatever resources they could find, throwing the others to the undead. It was then Trace and the bounty hunter that they had captured by the name of Tulka, who traveled around the Academy together, defeating the undead and discovering new ways to kill the zombie horde. The young Jedi eventually discovered that she could still communicate with the orchid that was being used to create the virus, and the Jedi could actually motivate it to grow within the bodies of the undead, thereby destroying them. While doing this, the Sith Lord Scabrous continued to search the halls for her, And finally, he'd lay a trap for her in the library, capturing her there. He then would draw the sword of Darth Dreer and would attempt to cut out the Jedi's heart. However, her brother, a fellow Jedi himself, arrived just in time, managing to stop the ritual and saving Trace, but was ultimately murdered by Darth Scabrous, who decided to run him through with the blade of Darth Dreer. Because he had to fight the Jedi, Darth Scabrous' body had reached its limits of resistance against the sickness, and he too eventually succumbed to it, becoming one of the undead. Trace was nearly killed by Scabrous' reanimated corpse in fact, but managed to persuade the orchid to grow within his body rapidly, forcing it to shoot up through his skull and destroying the Sith Lord once and for all. Trace managed to escape the now completely overrun Sith Academy and finally escape the world in the bounty hunter ship. The undead creatures were left behind as Trace returned to the Jedi Order in order to report the incident to the Council. Despite the apparent isolation of the world and the monsters within, the Jedi still feared that the sickness would one day soon spread to the wider galaxy, and her fears would be confirmed 3,000 years in the future. At long last, we arrived to the Imperial bioweapon, Project 17A, otherwise known as the Blackwing virus. It would be Sidious who would rediscover the existence of the sickness, and ironically, unlike those that would come before him, he had no interest in the ritual that caused it. The Emperor had no need for a dangerous path to eternal life. He already knew of the ways of essence transfer. Rather, he was far more interested in the sickness itself. As to him, he viewed it as the perfect weapon to destroy the Rebel Alliance. By 1 BBY, Project Blackwing was put into research and then production. The scientists of this biological weapon division operated in secrecy in order to fulfill the mandate put there by Lord Vader. The scientists were working out of the Star Destroyer known as Vector as it moved past and would tour the Outer Rim territories, wild space, and even parts of the unknown regions, making it a constantly moving laboratory in order to evade detection. Although the biologists and the weapons developers affiliated with the project were aware of the goal of the effort, the Stormtroopers and the officers aboard the Vector were completely kept in the dark about their research and what exactly they were doing in their midst, which would soon become their doom. Research eventually reached fruition after the scientists synthesized a concentrated viral fluid in the bodies of 2 humans. This more concentrated variant of the sickness existed in its original gray liquid form, but also had the potential to become an airborne strain as well. The Vector soon began making its way towards the weapons testing base on the Konji 7 as they loaded the virus in a collection of airtight tanks. Unfortunately, because the Stormtroopers had no idea what exactly was being done on their ship, they were careless when handling the tanks, and when moving them to the cargo bay, the tanks began to leak. The pathogen instantly went airborne and quickly infected thousands of personnel aboard the Vector. The scientists and high command managed to quarantine certain areas of the ship successfully though, but the virus was still spreading around despite their best effort. At the same time, the Star Destroyer's engines experienced a critical malfunction, as the ship periodically would lose power and would then stall in open space. While the technical crew tried in vain to address this problem, the research team conducted studies on the Blackwing virus's effects on the body and the infected, trying desperately to find a weakness. In order to get a better look, they collected the viral fluid being produced within the lungs of the diseased, and even discovered that some aboard the vessel had a natural immunity to the sickness. They used the blood of the immune in order to create an antivirus that could prevent the infection in those inoculated with it already. This antivirus was supposed to be issued to all crewmen aboard the Vector, but it soon became apparent that there would not be enough of the serum for everyone, and things were still getting worse. The issue with the engines continued, and eventually led to power failures throughout the entirety of the ship, causing the Vector to lose communications and come to a complete halt in one of the worst places possible. The ship stopped in the unknown regions. As the crew desperately fought back in near complete darkness, their isolation and quarantine fell apart, as the virus breached containment barriers aboard the Vector and began to spread to the rest of the crew. While hundreds of Stormtroopers became sick and died, those that were inoculated against the infection enacted a contingency plan, trying to stop those that were diseased from becoming the undead. In order to do this, the survivors rounded up the bodies of the deceased, throwing them into the garbage facility, grinding the bodies up, leaving behind a massive hill of flesh, limbs, and entrails in the waste room. And yet, that only caused yet another problem. Some of the remains were still possessed by the Blackwing virus, creating a moving mass of desiccated flesh and mutilated body parts. The virus was spreading faster than the immunity could stop it, and the bodies that had not become a part of this mass began to reawaken, eating those that were immune and inoculated, attempting to dispose of them, tearing away at the few remaining crew members. The Death Troopers novel picks up 2.5 months following this event, when an Imperial prison barge known as the Purge takes on a shortcut through the unknown regions in order to make their way to their prison facility. The ship experiences malfunctions and is forced to make an emergency stop, which happens to be right in front of the now downed Vector. The warden of the Purge saw this as a saving grace though, believing that they'd all be able to salvage parts off of the abandoned Star Destroyer, making them rich. But he was completely unaware of the death that he was about to bring upon all on board. A crew of technicians and troopers would board the ship to not only find the parts they needed, but also investigate why it had been abandoned in the first place. They found nothing on their first journey inside the ship though, but what they did not know was that they had caught the airborne pathogen and brought it back to the Purge. Over the next several days, the virus would spread around the Purge, causing the hospital wing to be overrun with guards and inmates who were all infected. Very soon, the undead made their presence known, and the only survivors of the ship was its captain, Dr. Zahara Cody, 2 young children who were prisoners, and Han Solo and Chewbacca, both of them who had been in solitary confinement aboard the Purge ship. The group of survivors would be forced to leave the Purge and fend for themselves aboard the Vector, dodging hordes of the undead while trying to find a cure and a place to possibly escape. It was revealed that the zombies had learned how to operate the Vector's tractor beam, which had been the reason the Purge broke down in the first place. It had all been an undead zombie trap. The group would have to deactivate it if they had any hope of escaping. We won't spoil the entirety of the book, as we did for Red Harvest earlier, but it is a must-read for anyone who is truly in pursuit of a more visceral Star Wars horror experience, so it gets our strong recommendation here. Following the events of the Vector and the Purge outbreak in 1 ABY, the Empire was still not ready to give up the secret weapons project. The rebellion had destroyed the Death Star by now, and so Lord Vader was apparently determined to ensure that the one Blackwing virus would work out to punish the Rebel Alliance. So Vader had the project relocated to a research facility on none other than the world of Dathomir, and this event would be the final resting place of this horrific disease. Once again, the virus would breach containment and quickly overran the research facility on Dathomir. However, it didn't just stop there, but would spread all over the world extremely quickly, even the native wildlife. This led to zombified rancors becoming a major issue on the world. During the outbreak, a number of witches also became infected with the disease, and in an attempt to contain the outbreak, the Empire killed most of the remaining Night Sisters, according to Legends continuity here. However, 3 of the infected witches survived, using the magic to fight off the contagion. The witches became known as the Sisters of the Void, and developed an ability to control the reanimated corpses to become their personal army. What we've learned is that this is the definitive Star Wars horror experience, and the story is an expansive one. In place of sterilizing the area of Dathomir in an orbital bombardment, the Empire quickly established a quarantine zone of the infection. They were still determined to ensure that the bioweapon saw the light of day, and they did not want to outright obliterate it. The few people who survived this initial virus outbreak were mostly Imperial staff and prisoners. However, they were all trapped in the quarantine zone. In the zone, they established 5 camps inside the area to try to live in safety while waiting for an evacuation. But the camps all came under regular attack from the zombie horde. Moreover, all rescue teams were attacked upon landing in the area, and their members were instantly killed off brutally before they could locate the survivors. Landing in the quarantine zone was eventually labeled as prohibited, and Imperial authorities only ever tried to support the survivors with airdropping supplies. They could no longer go in personally. This quarantine zone did not hold out for much longer, however, and it soon became an infected wasteland, all perishing. The Empire once again tried to reobtain the research data of the virus in order to try again. It became a sort of obsession for the Imperials, as contagious as the outbreak itself. But the Rebel Alliance, now aware of the virus thanks to Solo and Chewbacca, put a stop to their plans and ended the research of the virus once and for all. To this day, no cure has ever been found for the Blackwing plague, and in Legends, Dathomir remained irreversibly compromised by the undead and the sentient sickness that now drives them. The Blackwing plague is very unique though. It's not just any type of a Z-virus. It is created using alchemy, imbued with the dark side, sentient, the purest form of evil. It speaks to all those who it infects, including Chewbacca, who heard a voice in his head. It entices those into giving into their hunger, treating everything around them as nothing but a meal. It has its own will, and its own singular desire to feast. It craves tissue, perhaps desiring to feast on midichlorians. Nothing short of pure Jedi power will be enough to stop this disease, and even the Sith would be wise to keep it at bay, lest the entire galaxy be consumed and turned into a Blackwing apocalypse. Doing research for this topic, I can't help but hope that in the next Battlefront game, they add some sort of zombie mode, including the Blackwing plague. That would be incredible. Perhaps a setting like an abandoned Star Destroyer deep in space, an overrun prison, or even a quarantine zone on Dathomir. Undead Rancors, the whole lot of it. But anyway, my friends, what are your thoughts on the Blackwing virus and our finale for this Halloween season? As always, my friends, thank you so much for visiting the archives here today and for supporting us in our highlights of the darker aspects of Star Wars lore. As always, my friends, be careful where you travel among the galaxy and stars, and may the Force be with you.